I'm delighted to be. It's the first time that you and I have met
Yes.
after many years of exchanging emails, and you've been a supporter of ours, which I really thank you for. And the last time we were here, we had a look at your equipment and stuff. But I'm really eager to talk to you about your workflow, because you have some output.
Yes, thank you.
I believe you've just been working on Emerald City, and
Yep.
And how many episodes was that?
That was 10 episodes that we did. Actually, we did it a while ago, last summer. We recorded it at Air Studios.
Fantastic.
The whole score, which is kind of rare for TV to have that kind of commitment to the...
Every episode was...
Every episode.
Okay.
We did it in a big block over a couple of days. But we knew going in that we wanted the director, Tarsem, and I had worked together before on a movie called Immortals, which we scored at Air. So he, like me, was just a fan of that, and we went into the project knowing that's what we wanted to do. Okay. So we were committed to it in advance, which was great.
Fantastic. Well, it'd be great to, once we kind of get into the process to talk about how your workflow changes for working with live musicians. But how many minutes of music were you talking about?
I mean, it's fairly typical, somewhere in the 30s, 30, typical for the shows that I work on anyway. Yeah. I'd say 32 minutes per episode, 33 minutes, something like that. The challenge was to figure out how to get it recorded, because it's more music than you can really fit into a session, Even if you're doing 6, 7, 8 minutes an hour, which is a lot, and the musicians in London can do it easily. It's a big ask to do a triple session and make them work that hard all day. So we started to be economical about themes and reusing stuff, so we could not have to tax the process that hard to have to do a half an hour of music or more in a session. That was just too much, even for me, to conduct for 9 hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was just about going into the idea of thematic, motif-based writing and how we could move things around.
Right. And I think that there's something inherently different about doing a large multi-episodic series, because with a film, you can kind of cram, in two weeks if you need to, if there's been problems and stuff. But if you don't get ahead of the game, you can really come unstuck further down.
I totally agree. The film has two kind of camps. One is, if you're lucky enough, is you get to live in a certain space for 3 months or something, and you come in every day, and you can, I call it fishing for ideas. You catch and release. You find something, and it's not quite the right one, and it's either that or it's this mad dash to the finish where there's an interesting energy that comes from making a movie score in 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and then you just go on instinct. TV is more like that, except that it recurs and recurs and recurs and recurs. So there is no finish line like the way is with a movie. You have to do it again next week, and again next week, and again the week after. Mm-hmm. So there's a conditioning to being able to trust your instincts and execute them in a way that you have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 days to do. Get a good night's sleep and do it again. Yeah. And that's the game.
Absolutely.
So I rarely get the sort of that 3-month live in one space thing. I'm so used to just going with the first or second idea I have and going, that's what I have today. Yeah. And you kind of have to go under that mantra, because TV waits for no man, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And do you also trust, I don't know if this is the same for everyone, but do you also trust that you've just got to get going, and you will find something, and it'll probably be in the last 5 minutes of the score, but then you have to go back to the beginning and foreshadow it and all that. But something will happen. Yeah,
you can faff around all day, and then dinner is on the stove, and all of a sudden there it is, and you're okay. I guess we're going back to the 4 cues you just finished.
Do you know why I think that is?
Why?
Well, I spoke to my therapist about this, and
give me his number.
Tip to successful film composition is a fantastic therapist.
Yeah, I want his number.
He said true creativity happens when you're in the moment, and if you're not thinking about tomorrow, the past, the phone call that's just happened, you've actually stopped. You tend to be in the moment, and I find it. I get up very early in the morning to work, but I find all my good ideas come at the point I'd like to go to the pub, to be honest. Yeah. And I think it's like, just as you're ready to leave, you'll hit a note on the piano, and it'll. Yeah. Because you're in the moment. You're not anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also. I remember talking to Howard Shore about this at an event or something, and he lives in upstate New York in this very rural area, and said, so why do you live, just asked, why do you live there? And he said he exists in this dreamlike state because he walks through this wooded, foresty area to his composing hut or whatever, room or whatever you call it. And he gets to stay in that dreamlike state. And I kind of understand that. I live kind of up in the country here. And, you know, there's a different energy to being in London or being in Los Angeles to being someplace more where you can stay in that zone. And, you know, you can't force the moment, but you can at least put yourself into an environment that might encourage it to come, you know. And we both have young kids and all that entails, and they barge in my door, and usually at the worst possible time. It's the moment's coming, it's almost there, and then the kids come in. So the joys of parenthood.
So what is it? Do you have an established workflow, would you say, certainly for a big series? What's your first step?
It's almost always the point of entry.
Yeah.
It's usually always a tune of some kind.
Okay.
Whether it be a tune for a character, which is, I think, something I still like to do. It's a bit on the old-fashioned scale, but I still think, you know, Dorothy needs a tune, that kind of thing. Sometimes it's an environment. The cue I'm going to play you today is the Yellow Brick Road theme, which is the idea of promise and journey and things like that, as opposed to a character. But that was my point of entry to Emerald City, was the Yellow Brick Road theme. I knew we needed it. I knew I wanted to have something that had momentum and had the promise of something taking her home and all the things that we know Wizard of Oz would deliver.
Sure.
So that was my point of entry. Sometimes it could be something sonic related. It might be sculpting a world that, you know, through pads or synths, if that's the kind of vernacular you're going to go for.
Sure.
You know, you know, I don't know. It's different every time in a way, but I don't sit at the piano as much as I used to.
Okay.
I sit. This is kind of the thing. I would say the first thing my fingers hit in the morning is probably the Spitfire ensemble string patch. It just feels like the bread and butter of composing, you know.
Yeah, that's exactly the same. I use the flautando to write with. It just has a choral quality, and I think if anything sounds good on something that's choral, then it'll sound good on.
By the way, I have a huge thank you to give you, which is I've been double-clicking ensemble strings and concertino strings at the same time so they play together for like 10 years.
Right.
And now you have a combo concertino ensemble patch. So that's a favorite of mine too.
Yes, that is a good one. That when we recorded that with them in the same room, and that's always different than just laying them over. So yeah, no, that is a very useful one actually. Absolutely. So you start with that. You speak of your entry point. Do you tend to work with a similar template that you pimp for each job, or?
I tend to revamp the template is basically the orchestra
at
this point, and some select synths and some select percussion.
Okay.
That is in the big PC that is.
So you have a slave.
Yeah, you know. Yeah. If you had known me 10 years ago, you would know there'd never be a PC even on the block of my street, let alone. But it works great for that. So basically, the core template is mostly orchestral based, and then I go fishing for sounds, you know, through the immense contact library we all have of interesting things. But the template we revamp, I'd say once a year, twice a year at the most.
Okay. Just
because logistically, it's too hard to go back into older projects if you keep, can I say, fucking with it, messing with it all the time?
Yeah, no, we
okay,
love
good. So, for example, we just went through all of your new symphonic stuff, and it's all in there. And that will probably be it for, say, 6 months. And then if something new comes out that we think we really want to put in there, we'll stop and put it in.
Okay.
And that's the core template that stays, and we have a clone of it in my LA studio, and we kind of lock it off for 6 months at a time.
I understand.
It's just too much work to chase it if you keep, you know.
Completely.
So then it's just a la carte.
Okay. And I'm going to get really deep and nerdy here, but what is your preferred, do you have a sound per track, or are you a key switcher, or?
Do you want me to show you or tell you?
Yeah, let's get your screen recording on.
You want a quick rundown of the template?
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
So at this point, I am almost exclusively all things Spitfire, which is...
I'm very flattered, thank you.
I have a couple of bits and bobs from other libraries that I just like, but it's really just, you know. So here's the full complement of woods.
Okay.
Which is the solo instruments, and then I have an ensemble as well. So for example, to answer your question, for flutes, I'll have key switches set up for individual, you know, articulations, which I love.
Okay.
Whereas the ensemble is pretty much just the ensemble. It's just what it's doing. Same goes with the brass. So for 6 French horns, I'll have 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 articulations ready to go. And so those are mapped like that.
Yeah.
And then for strings, I have 2 setups. I have this gigantic ensemble folder where I have 4 of everything. And this is to facilitate the idea of more of the sketching.
Sure.
Maybe it's low strings and high strings, or it's tune and something. And so I have 4 of everything. These are not key switched. So this is longs, concertino, the blend we just spoke of, flautando, harmonics, sopran, the whole gamut. Okay. So that's a very big folder of just kind of the 4 of everything, which are not key switched. And then below it, I have the violin, viola, cello, bass with the full.
Okay.
So when I'm thinking sketching, I'm thinking big picture, I'm writing with both hands on the keyboard, it's the ensemble patch. And I have vibrato and mod ready to go so I can expressively, So that's the kind of jamming, Jackson Pollock-y kind of part of composing. Sure. I don't know if you work the same way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And once you kind of have some sort of, group idea, then it makes its way down to the individual sections here, which is more thinking of detailed orchestration. And that's when you would get into articulations and that kind of thing.
Okay. And when you go into the detail, is it just to really pick stuff out, or do you orchestrate every line?
It's an interesting question. I orchestrate every line by myself. I always have. Yeah. And it's something I'd actually like to get away from as I get older and as I get more experience. I'd rather start sketching and find a great orchestrator who can take those ideas and maybe, bring colors that I hadn't thought of. Yeah. But as it stands, like this cue I'm going to play you, every single part is orchestrated in detail on the instrument that it's going to be. Yeah. And I'll use little, I call them Easter eggs for my orchestrator. I'll write, half trems, half natural on the part. Yeah. If that doesn't exist, or I'll write, a poco vibrato, things like this. Okay, I understand. So in this case, it has.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's a very important point where kind of reality is concerned. And someone pointed it out. It was Dario Marianelli pointed out to me the other day. He says you have to put each part in, because why would the dynamic maneuvers that you make for the top line be the same as the middle pedaling viola? They're not.
They're not. No, exactly. So, for example, here is the group version of the tune I'm going to show you guys. So this is a very common thing for me. This is just the choral string, the choir of strings doing their chords and some sort of a tune on top. That's kind of the entry point to here's my melody. And, it sounds. Shouldn't make noise. I'm lucky. So that's kind of the sketching. It's all sort of in there. Sure. But it's in one big block thing. So then from there, it would come down to, okay, well, obviously the basses are going to probably be in octaves, I imagine, if they show up. Yeah, there they are doing their thing. So then, their dynamics tend to be a little bit more subdued as basses are. Yeah. Whereas the tune probably has a much more shape to it, that kind of thing. Yeah. And that's pretty much how the process goes in terms of taking, a piano sketch to a two-handed string part to then actually thinking about, if we're talking earlier about writing music on computers for computers versus writing music on computers for live musicians. Yeah. Which is different. Yes. I hear a lot of this on TV where people are using the ensemble patch with like 8 voices in there. Yeah. And no matter how good the string library is, the harmonic content just becomes, it just doesn't sound as natural as it, it's just not meant to be that way, you know? So I find that it's, and I'm guilty of it too, if you're under duress, you just become lazy and you go, there we go, it's kind of.
Kitchen sink.
Yeah, kind of, there you go. But if you have the time to detail it out, I think it makes a big difference in writing a realistic mock-up that will emotively move your director and your producer to go, we love this, and then get it into a place where it can be orchestrated and realized through live musicians. When I'm writing, I'm on the podium in my head. I see the band in front of me, and I'm thinking about visually how it looks and how it sounds and how it feels.
Wow, okay. And having a slave sample playback machine there's great advantages, but there are also pitfalls. Do you have to kind of reset the key switches and the dynamic things?
No, it's working pretty well. I mean, we spent forever, by we, I mean my two faithful assistants are in the back of the room. We spent forever setting it up, and once it's working, it kind of works, you know.
Okay.
There's not a lot of messing about, you know, so.
So when you're switching between cues and stuff, you're not having to make sure that at the end of that thing that you've key switched, you key switch it back to the default position?
No, I mean, I have my little cash register here, so, you know, these numbers move between the articulations. So if I want long concert, you know, that's number 3. Right. It switches to 3. I'll just record it in the part. Okay. You know, just so I don't have to remember what it was or something like that.
Okay, I understand. You know. And how are you connected to the PC? Is it VE Pro? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So this is a dustbin Mac, essentially, and then the VEP machine goes in through Cubase and then it goes back into Pro Tools. Okay. So it's kind of a 3-machine
gotcha
system.
And are you putting a little bit of reverb, bit of splosh on things?
Mm-hmm. I do. I still love hardware reverbs just for this particular thing, which is the tail can't be beat, you know. So the Lexicon PCM96, which is a true 5.1 reverb, tends to have everything go into it just a little. Yeah. It gives it a little extra, it'll homogenize. Now with your library being 99% of what I write on, the dream has come true of having one space. Yeah, absolutely. But before that, it was 6, 8, 7, 10, 11 string libraries from different places, and you had to somehow gentrify them into a sound that made them feel like they belonged in the same space. That's where that reverb became my best friend for all these years. Yeah. Now it's just fairy dust, really.
Absolutely.
You know.
Bit of homogeneity, and that difficult problem you get with the long articulations where they don't sound as reverberant as the shorts because they always diminuendo. They'll never stop dead.
Yes.
Absolutely fantastic. So. I'll sit back down. Should we have a look at this cue then and see?
Yeah. So this scene was Dorothy going down the Yellow Brick Road. Yeah. And we wanted what I wanted for Dorothy was, you know, she's a simple girl and she needed a simple tune, almost lullaby simple to me. Okay. But if you look at the way it's shot, it's very colorful. So I wanted the chord progressions to have a lot of chroma. I guess would be the word, you know. Sure. So a simple tune with some retonicization chords that felt like you were going on a journey, because that's what the Yellow Brick Road represented to me. So that was where my head was going down the path creatively as my point of entry. So I wanted a simple tune with something that felt complex harmonically. Yeah. That was really the starting point for it. Let's see if I can remember it. I wrote it like a year ago. But it was something like... So it's really moving around harmonically to different places, from C minor. I mean, C minor to D flat major is, you know, very non-diatonic.
Sure,
you know?
Absolutely.
I knew that it didn't need a B section only because the amount of time it's on screen, and I had already seen it, didn't call for a B section. Normally I'd write an A tune and a B tune, which I find way harder than the A tune. I don't know about you. The B tune takes forever. So luckily I only needed to go around once. That's basically it. But at the heart of it is, it's almost like a lullaby, you know. Yeah. It's almost like my daughter could sing, you know. And then from there comes the two-handed, you know, this. We modulate. And that was really the core of the writing process, and now we have to orchestrate it.
Okay.
We have to take it into the next place. Now, what we knew going in was we knew which band we were writing for at Air. It's a TV project. It's not
It's not a Nolan.
It's not a Nolan movie, exactly. So I wrote it down because I had forgotten. So this band was, for strings, 10, 10, 8, 6, 4.
Yeah.
And woods, we had 2 flutes, an oboe, 2 clarinets, and a bassoon, 4 horns, and 3 trombones. Right. So that's it. So I'm not going to write...
All at the same time?
All at the same time.
Okay.
And so I'm not going to write 4 trombone parts, so I don't have 4 trombones, you know?
Yeah.
And with 4 horns, it's going to be either in unison or at the most 2-part divisi.
Sure.
With 4 basses, they're probably going to be in octaves the whole time. So there's an efficiency going into that, knowing that that's all you have to work. That's not all you have to work with. That's what you have to work with.
Do you find, as the years have gone on, that these kind of things, I think when I was a younger composer, I found really restrictive. I now find them really inspiring.
Isn't it? I totally love it. I love rules. I always say,
exactly.
if the project doesn't give you rules, make some, because otherwise it's just white space. And you're like, you know, where do I even go?
Yeah, and particularly when you're younger and you don't have a family and you can stay up for 3 nights in a row, you know, you do them because the possibilities are infinite. And I think referring back to what you were saying about hearing sample-only TV music often, you go, well, guys, I mean, this is like 3 Mahler orchestras playing on top of each other.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think a thing that's really worth pointing out for people thinking about using Air Studios is that may sound like a medium-sized band, you know, going down to only 4 basses. But with those players in that room, it sounds pretty enormous, doesn't it?
I think that is a key thing, which is it had to be that room.
Yeah.
Even if you'd offered me Abbey Road, it would have been the wrong fit for that band.
Yeah.
You know, I was writing for, you know, Air's little hexagonal shape or whatever it is, and Jeff Foster, who's of course, you know, the great engineer there. I knew it would sound massive, and it does sound massive. And I have the final stems to play for you later. So I wasn't worried about size. I was worried about efficiency of orchestration, because if you get too divisi with that band, then you have problems.
Yeah.
2 players on a note or 1 player on a note, that's not going to work. So it just meant being efficient about orchestration, which is a great limitation in a way.
Yeah.
You know, I tend to write really thick, heavy chords, so I couldn't do that this time. I had to keep it tighter.
And do you kind of have a hybrid approach? Do you, for example, go, well, I'll let the samples do that, or the little high tremolanda or anything like that, or do you try and replace?
I went through the Hans Zimmer school of programming, so I very much programmed the way he taught me to. And there was a mentality going in about which samples you're going to use or blend in, and that's what I did for a long time.
Okay.
And now I don't, unless I absolutely have to. I've come to love what the live experience brings to it. And sometimes it's not as big as you remember it being, and that's okay.
Okay.
You know, with the exception of harmonics, I keep those because yours are really good and they're a pain in the ass to do.
Yeah, it's
like that's what Jeff Foster will say. Just let them use the samples. So this was very much written for that studio. Absolutely.
Okay, I understand.
From this block, there's our tune.
Sure.
It ends up coming down to, so we'll mute that. Don't need you anymore. And here's our violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, bass.
So you get rid of your ensembles.
Yeah, it's like a map at that point, you know, or a guide. You know, I don't return to it after there it sits in case needed.
And when you're programming each line, how do you retain it, or do you follow the score, or do you follow the blocks?
You know, it becomes kind of Escher-like after a while, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's like the Matrix. I see the block thing more than I see the notes.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, I've yet to find a sequencer that will do live music transcription on the fly in real time the way that would make any sense to us.
Yeah, sure.
When that happens, I'll start moving the notes around.
Yeah.
Until then, I live in the block editor. You know, it's just life.
So you have the kind of the piano roll up whilst you're firing in each line.
Yes, exactly. So in this case, back to Air Studios, Jeff Foster wanted the violin set up antiphonally, which means if you're on the podium, it's first to the left and seconds to the right.
Where the cellist would be. Yeah.
Where the cellist would be, viola, cello, and the bass from the middle at the back. His theory was that it sounds, well, out of experience, it sounds bigger, and the basses come right through the middle up to the tree mics, So 4 basses sounds like 8 because there's nothing in the way of them and the wood floor and the tree.
Okay.
So
that's
this was his sonic way, because I said to Jeff, how can we make this sound as big as we can? He said, split the violins. So I'll actually go into the VEP build and pan the second violinist to the right
Okay.
to approximate what it's going to sound like.
And I guess if you're writing particularly the second bit where you go back to the original melody but in octaves, you suddenly have a physical distance,
Yes.
you know, as opposed to it being.
Yes.
So it's an octave that way and an octave that way.
Yes. And so, for example, on the podium, with the ink being the same, let's say your first and seconds are doing, off the top of my head, half trem, half natural effect. Mm-hmm. But both sides are doing it. Well, what if only one side did the trems, one side did all of a sudden it's a very different experience,
Yeah.
you know, depending what's going on screen. So you can play without having to change the ink, you can play with articulations on the podium and go, why don't you guys do, you know, half concertino and just have fun with it, you know? Mm-hmm. So anyway, the template was set up to reflect that so I could hear it in the way that I envisioned the players playing it.
Okay.
So then the block thing becomes very much just straightforward, just the individual sections. When you look at them together, it resembles a lot what the block thing did.
Sure.
But only now it's really specifically thought out. You know, again, our basses, since we only have 4, are going to be in octaves for efficiency.
Yeah.
You know, with our cello, I think they're only 2 to a note. I think was the most. I wanted it to get a full sound. You know, the violins have the tune, of course. And then so the section ends up sounding very similar, but to me, there's a difference between the choral string writing on the ensemble when you start to get 6, 7, 8, 9 notes. Mm-hmm. Again, back to the harmonic thing, it just becomes a little dense.
Sure.
As opposed to the way you guys have mapped these out, where they really start to sing, in theory. There's just an openness to it now. Now it sounds more like live musicians.
Yes.
And if I was going to air without live musicians, this is what I would do.
Okay.
Make it the best I can sound.
Yeah.
And I guess in a way, there isn't a difference between that interim step between it's going to live on a computer and go to air, or it's going to go to the live musicians. I take a lot of pride in this part of it. Again, it's just part of the craft I learned in my Hans days, and it just stuck in my DNA as working those controller parts for a long time until they sound musical.
Yeah.
Until they move me. Because if it doesn't move me, how is it going to move someone else, you know? Or if it does move me, it should, in theory, move someone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then the French horns will join at some point up here. And again, I had 2 trombones and a bass trombone, and I used your 6 French horn patch, which is very similar to what the 4 horns would sound like. Bar 18. So here's the brass ensemble that I had. French horns are a little on the loud side, but that's okay. And then again, woodwinds. I knew I had some flutes and some, these were cued mostly just to create some air in the room. I think we ended up using them in the final recording.
Okay.
But again, this is not Stravinsky. It's a tune and some chords, so there wasn't a lot of in-depth orchestration. It was more just painting colors and shapes, that kind of thing. And then so somewhere back here, if it all plays. Some choir too. And so from a simple tune to the grandeur of the
Amazing.
a few synth basses hiding in there. But I have a lot of guys making custom sounds for me to with a specific emotional direction. I want it to feel like this or behave like this.
Yeah.
I have a patch I made 1,000 years ago, which is just basically a mini Moog. It just sits there, and it's the compression goes, the knob goes all the way to as far as it will go. And what happens is I tuck it under. Here, I'll show you.
And is that from a real?
I made it so long ago, I don't really remember where it came from. But here, I'll show you, to me, the emotional difference it makes, which I'm all about that, is it's just ever so slightly in there. So I'll play it without it, and I'll just blend it in. You'll see what I mean.
Particularly there.
So here's without it. And, the orchestra's not supposed to go down that last octave.
As a human, you're feeling it.
I feel it.
Yeah.
So almost every orchestra part I have is a little of that in there just for that last octave. And to me, it moves me. It's not just for a show, I feel it more.
Yeah. And with those kind of subharmonic things, do you ever have concerns about people being able to hear it on TV and stuff?
That's a great question. I came to the realization about 2 years ago. I switched my entire template over to full surround. I listen in surround, I deliver in surround, even if it's for computers only. And I write for the highest possible common denominator, musically, sonically. And then after that, it's out of my control,
And then next time you're on the subway, you see them all watching it on
Yes. Yeah, so I remember watching a broadcast of Vikings in Canada on the CBC, which is our BBC in Canada, and their broadcast is the worst sounding. It's compressed, it's terrible sounding. And I remember just hiding in shame, thinking, oh my God, it sounds terrible. But if you watch the DVDs with its 1080p picture, and it sounds fantastic. Mm-hmm. So when you go to the dub stage, I just have to go with that idea that we have to go as high as we can, and then it's out of my control.
I think that's I probably get myself into trouble for saying that, but I think that's an American approach. Or born of. I'm not saying Americans as a nationality, but the industry in this country is to aim for the highest kind of technical mark. Whereas I find a lot of dubs that happen in London, it's very much, they aim for the Sony Trinitron with the speaker on the side of the TV. And I think that's a terrible shame because it stifles creativity and sonic adventure and all of that stuff. There are exceptions to that.
Yeah. No, it happens here too. I mean, the dub stage for Vikings, who I know very well, they're very good mixers. They're in Canada.
Okay.
They have the big, theatrical dub stage. And over to the side, they have a little, your mom's TV, flat screen with the sound pumped out of the speakers on the TV. We do check it. Yeah. But I don't think we pander to it. We just go, it's someone's going to listen to it in that way. Yeah. But we have to believe that a subsonic bass part that makes me feel something, someone somewhere is going to experience it and it's worth doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It just kind of, I'm a engineer, record producer before I was ever a film composer, so the euphonic nature of things is part of my DNA. I like things that sound good.
It's got to be fun. You've got to get out. I mean, this is always the question I have when I walk into a studio and I said all they've got is a pair, a composer studio or a producer studio, and all they've got is a pair of NS10s.
Oh God, help me!
And you're like, surely life has got to be happier than this. It's got to be fun. I switched to 5.1 because we're writing for it. It's so much fun. We've got this huge bandwidth to play with, this huge, and you can dream up ideas and, they'll mute them out at the dub, but no, it's fantastic.
Well, I mean, you probably can't hear it on the video feed, but at the end of that crescendo, as the entire band releases into that reverb, it just washes by you. It's just an emotional response, You can't separate the sound from the acoustic space that it behaves in.
Absolutely.
It reminds me of doing drum tracking. You see people put up the snare mic and the bass drum mic and the tom mic, and it's like, it's not about that. No. Put the kick up and the overheads up, and you've got a drum sound. Yeah. Because the acoustic space that it inherently sits in is what gives you the emotional response.
Absolutely.
Which is why we love Air Studios so much. It's just the most amazing sonic space probably in the world that's equipped for recording at least.
And the musicians love it as well, which means you get a better performance out of them.
Exactly.
So in the life cycle of a queue, what is your next stage before hopping on Air New Zealand to go to...
I prefer Virgin, but I'll take either. The next stage will be orchestration. And, again, back to the Hans days where it was so detailed in orchestration that really it became more of a MIDI transcription exercise than it became what we think of as orchestration being an artistic venture or painting with color. And part of that sticks with me because I just did it with him for so long and he taught me how to do that. So in this case, every part is on the part it's going to be on.
Yeah.
There's no, where should we divide the voices here? I did it myself.
Yeah.
What I will do is I'll leave little Easter eggs in the names, half trem, half natural, unless there's a part in your samples that do exactly that. Poco vibrato or things like this. Yeah. And then it goes on the page. It comes back to me.
So how do you spit it out? Do you just send the Cubase file?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. There used to be a MIDI takedown interim step before it got to Sibelius or Finale. Now they just basically import it. It works fine.
Okay.
My orchestra does not work on Cubase and doesn't need to work on Cubase.
Okay.
So he'll put it in. He'll send it back to me. I'll make notes, if any.
Yeah.
Or if it's something where the ink is fine, but I want to make a change on the stage, I'll make a note for myself and not bother him because he's busy.
Sure.
And if there is a problem or something, I'll mark it in red. We'll scan it to him, send it back, and I see him on the stage. It's pretty streamlined these days. The days of note errors are almost over. I mean, I can't remember the last time I had an actual wrong note on the podium. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
It's like, because it's in there already.
Yeah. I find one of the dangers is when you're doing kind of multi-episodics and you're grabbing cues from here and then transposing a bit, is leaving the transpose unnormalized sometimes can catch you out. I think that's the only time I ever you go, oh, okay.
That happens, but.
And the track laying process, are you all kind of, is everything bussed through into a multi-track and what's it called, a playback stem kind of setup?
How nerdy do you want to go?
Oh, let's do it.
Okay,
let's do it.
Because I have a super nerdy setup that I engineered this myself. So basically, if you can see here at the bottom, this is Cubase 9, which they actually made the window the way I've been using it for years, which is, I have approximately 20 or 30 stereo stems. There they are.
Okay.
Strings long, strings short, French horns, brass long, brass short, and on.
Okay.
That is the main food group, including reverb sends, and these all go into Pro Tools. So if I skip over to Pro Tools, the exact mirror of that is right here.
Gotcha.
This is that exactly. So it's all bussed to holy heaven.
Yeah.
And what happens is these are record-enabled tracks. If I want to do a proper mix with an engineer, there used to be this layback phase where you have to go in and have someone peel off the parts one at a time. What I basically did was said, okay, what are the 20 or 30 most commonly used food groups? And let's just commit to that and never have a layback phase ever in our lives again.
Yeah.
So there it is, including piano bells, harps, 3 or 4 percussion stems, synth pads, synth arps, synth bass, and 3 arbitrary live tracks.
One of the problems I found with the layback thing is it was like there was this mad process where you'd break your mix and half of the engineer's time was just literally rebuilding your Lego.
And it's never as good, is it?
Yeah,
somehow?
no, it's never. Yeah,
exactly. So I have some mastering EQ that I do on the way out that goes to tape, if you will, so to speak. So this 20 or 30 stem format is meant to be for an engineer to mix.
Okay.
That in turn gets surroundized through 5.1 reverbs, this unwrapper. Right now I'm using the new gen Halo, which I mute the left and the right. It only provides the center and the surround additional material.
Okay.
Then in turn, I deliver to the dub stage this 10 up to 10 5.1 stems.
Okay.
The reason they're all 5.1, it used to be like 3.1 for the bass, 5.0 for the choir, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
On the dub stage, if they need to edit, they can move any track anywhere. So whereas in fact the bass only has left, right, and the .1, there is nothing else, but it's empty tracks. But it makes the logistics on the dub stage easier.
Okay.
So I don't often deliver all 10, but they're ready to go. And so, for example, Vikings, or if this was going to air as such, would be orchestra and choir, pianos, bells, and harps, perk A, perk B, bass and drones, synth pads, arps, and 3 live tracks.
Okay.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And we don't deviate from it hardly ever.
Great.
So it's pre-bussed in 2 stages, a 20 or 30 stem layback.
Yeah.
It is not all inclusive, but kind of close enough,
Yeah.
you know, for rock and roll. That goes to an engineer to mix. If it goes right to air, it goes then into the surroundized 10 5.1 stems. And then you hit F12 and it all happens in real time.
And when you say when it goes into air, where it goes to mix?
To the dub stage. Yeah.
Oh, to the dub stage. Okay. And do you, when you're recording live instruments, do you work with the large layback? And that's fine. It doesn't present problems having a big
Live
voice?
soloist or live orchestra?
Live orchestra.
Live orchestra is that's another level where we do a proper mix. You know,
Okay.
we'll have a different.
But I mean, in the sense of what do you prepare? Do you have playback stems, which are a smaller number, or you just use? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you
We'll do a little redux, you know, so you know, to keep it easy, you know. So it just works for us, and it's quick, and it, you know, I was the guy who did the laybacks till 5 a.m, and you just want to hang yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's the worst job in the world. And like you said, on top of it, you take it apart to put it back together. Not only is it not as good, it took hours and hours and hours. It just seemed inane to me to do that. So this is the system that we developed, and it works great. And it also allows me one last stage of mixing. Let's say the whole key was done, but the choir is just a little too loud.
Yeah.
Instead of going into MIDI and having to scale the MIDI, I just turn in the fader back.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And do you tend to do your mixes?
I have a great engineer that I trained. He was a college student who's now a fantastic engineer, Phil McGowan, who works with me. He mixes anything that has live orchestra. Everything else I kind of mix myself.
Okay, fantastic. And are there any kind of pointers? I think that people often make grave errors with the things like the LFE channel. Using that as part of your bass management, I believe, is a bit of a no-no. Are there any kind of mixing for composers who are maybe not farming out the mixing process? Any pitfalls that they should avoid for preparing stuff for the dub stage?
I'd avoid the .1 for now, unless you really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Your chances for error are higher than success if you don't know what it is and how to use it. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I do provide some out of my room, but I've experimented with it and I know what it is.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's worth it.
Well, I used to make the mistake of it being literally like a crossover, with the low stuff goes in the .1, and the minute they see continuous stuff, mute, and there goes your bottom end.
Well, you know, back to what you said about the high road is you have to, there's a reason why no one puts the melody in the back left surround. Because someone in Arkansas is watching the movie theater and they're not going to hear the oboe at all, right? So I think that you have to treat your music as full range, and the .1 is just a little extra.
Yeah.
That if it's not there, it's not like it doesn't actually, you know, translate anymore.
I think a sound department guy said, it's just remember, it's literal. It's low frequency effects. It's for effects.
Yep.
It's a fun thing, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I have a dedicated track just for the low booms because it's such a part of the vernacular.
Yeah.
And I worked with my first job in LA. I worked for James Newton Howard for a very brief time, and we had a saying for his sonic signature, which is so unique, which is the silver top and the black bottom. We called it, you know, that silvery string thing. But those booms had such gravity to them. So I have a .1 for just for that particular stem because it actually extends in a way that I find moves me.
Yeah. And dubbing engineers understand that vernacular.
Yes. Yeah. I got a bit of resistance when I first started delivering in surround. I think it's more common now, but I was one of the first guys to do it. The track count goes up, and they're all, you know. But the reason I did it was I delivered stereo stems for a main title. They did this upmixing in the dub theater, and I got the 5.1 back to have up for reference and the full done, and I didn't like the way it sounded. Yeah. And to their defense, their job is not to mix music all day. Their job is to dub things. Yeah. So I had the chance to spend a lot of time on my end really finessing the 5.1 upmix until I was really happy with it and checking the down mix. So why wouldn't you do that, you know? Yeah. So we spent a lot of care on that. We're proud of the sonic part of it. We just enjoy it. And like you said, if it makes you happy, you know, it gets you out of bed and excited to My room sounds inspiring. I think it's important. It's important for me.
Yeah, absolutely. A very inspiring space. And so you recorded the orchestra, and how much time did you have for the to lay this stuff down?
Very little.
Right.
It was a mad dash, as it always is. At this point we factor in, because the last cue is finished and the orchestra session's basically in about 3 days. We factor in, like, while I'm on the plane, the orchestra can be doing X number of cues.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. My team that I work with know it so well. No one complains. It just, you put on the night vision goggles as needed, and just do what you have to do.
Our families understand this as well.
They usually understand, mostly.
I'm in air in 2 weeks' time, so I won't see you until the end of the month.
Yes. At which point I'll take you to Hawaii or something. No, it's the process is pretty finely tuned. Things happen. Human error is things fall through the cracks. But honestly, you just surround yourself with people that you trust and people who understand how you work, and having these things in place where I know that operator error is reduced because I just hit record and it all happens.
I think what's really inspired me here is I think the way I work is I tend to reinvent the wheel every time I approach a job, and not from the point of view of the sonics, but just the process. And I think that's why the errors that I do suffer with, which usually involves, unfortunately, because I work and kind of have a base in London, it means it's only ever a taxi cab across London to pick up that lone oboe part. But,
yes.
No, I think it's very inspiring to see that you've through your experience, have established the palette, the engineer's palette.
Well, it's a fine line, though, isn't it? Because it can become stale too. So I think the orchestra is always the orchestra.
Yeah.
And again, if I didn't say it earlier, I want to say it now. The Spitfire, what you guys have done has been the dream for as long as I've been in this business, which is to have, a flute part behave the way it does on the page, which is the notes are the same. And you put the articulations over the top. You don't have, flute player doesn't have 6 parts. They have 1 part. And you say, play it like this. Well, now through expression mapping in your stuff, I have 1 flute part.
Yeah.
It's just brilliant,
Thank you.
And everything is all there. So to me, that's never going to change. Mm-hmm. So that is the core of the palette, because I feel like it's always going to be around, you know.
I think the other key thing that was a really big decision when we started this whole enterprise about 10 years ago was to not stick the instruments as close to the mics as possible, was to put them where they sat. And I think that's a really tough thing I've found, is if it's not positioned, is getting that idea of position and how it's going to sound, I think is very difficult. Yeah,
like in your tree configuration, I have the tree and the outrigger is at 0, and the close mic's in just down a little bit. I like an ambient sound. If you listen to Danny Elfman's scores, he likes a drier sound. That's just his style.
Yeah.
I like the lushness of space. And again, back to the idea of miking a snare drum. If you listen to the individual snare drum mic, it sounds like about this big. But in the room, and with the sonic space, it becomes an emotional response. So for me, I love the sound of air. I love the room. I use as much of the room as I can. Mm-hmm. And your samples put me in that space, and I have them up quite loud because I want that. I want that. I want to hear the distance between me and the microphones, or between the musician and the microphones, and I like that.
Yeah.
And your samples do that, and I tweak them to even accentuate that even a little bit more.
Yeah.
By having the tree and the outriggers up at 0 and just some close for definition.
Yeah.
And honestly, if I was mixing the live orchestra, at the end of the day, my engineer will give me 2 faders, the everything but the close mics and the close mics. And on a given cue, we'll just go, that feels about the right amount of edge, or it's quite ambient, or it's very in your face. And there's really a lot of those 2 elements we're blending.
Right.
Because otherwise it kind of is what it is,
Amazing. So, getting to the finish line of the life cycle of your cue, how quickly did you have to kind of get through material at Air Studios for this project?
Well, on top of the sonic reason to record in London, which I love, and LA too, is the London players are so fast and they're so good, and they can play the same part repeatedly with the same amount of passion, with little complaint. And they can move very, very quickly. I know I've recorded all over the world, so I've learned through trial and error and a lot of error that, I'd rather have fewer players in London and take the second take all day long than twice the players in a B-level Eastern European community where they're trying their best. But for me, it comes down to film score is its own language. It's different than classical music.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of those Eastern European players play multiple vibrato as their de facto position, because that's all they knew. They're not doing anything wrong. It's just, it's not the language that we are speaking.
Yeah.
So London speaks that language, A, and B, what they do that only, other than London, LA is great at it, and actually Nashville's not bad at it either, is I think of it like a school of fish making the same shape. They phrase together without me telling them to. It's an amazing thing. Yeah. And you really realize it in the absence of it when you're at a place where the orchestra does not phrase together, and it just doesn't sound like of a thing, you know? No. You're trying to aim at the same emotional point in space. You're trying to get 40 players or 60 or 100 to get to this place. And in London, it happens very naturally. So a lot of times I know, as a long-winded answer to your question is, I know I can get through a lot of material, and even what I thought was on the podium an okay take, in retrospect, is probably fucking great. Yeah. And if it's an important cue, I'll get into maybe take 3 or 4 or 5, but that's about it. That's all it needs. By then it's...
And it's not just the phrasing together, it is they understand the film zeitgeist, that silky top. So it's not a matter of, okay, we want this to sound like, we want it to sound silky on the top. They just know the default position. And they kind of move with the times, and they're playing with a lot less vibrato, but still very beautifully these days. I also find it's like a graph. If this axis is takes, I think London it's like that, and a lot of other places it's slower, and then it dies off. So it's like working out, okay, that take was as good as it's going to get. It's not going to get any better than that. And I think.
And you have to live with the flaws or the tuning or the timing, and just go. You're thinking about blending the samples in at that point, aren't you? Because you just know that's what you've got. Whereas with the London guys, here's a great example. A lot of times my orchestra is working in a bubble. He's learned to read my MIDI controller data, which resembles the shape I'm after. But sometimes just the mechanics of working it, if you look at it, he would literally translate the up and down hairpins based on the curves of the controller data. On the page, it looks very confusing. And the players are doing their best. And something's not right, I would say to everybody, ignore the dynamics, just play it musically. Yeah. And it just happens. Yeah. And it comes back and it's beautiful. I say, just give me 4-bar phrases, just whatever that means to you. And all of a sudden they start scribbling out they're forcing the hairpins up and down because that's what's on the page. I go to scratch that. Yeah. Just play beautifully, and it happens.
And I think I noticed when you give them notes like that, they just start moving in their chairs more, and you get this movement, which is incredible.
Yeah, it's conducting. Conducting live is the ultimate rush for me and what we do, but conducting conducting in the studio, specifically at Air, is just such an amazing experience. It's so much fun and joy, and to be there when things get created. And I always encourage the director and the producers to come, and they almost always do, and they did in Emerald City.
It's always a happy day.
It's a happy day, and all of a sudden a lot of little concerns just go away because they're there at the moment it happens. They're there at that genesis when the players have hit that emotional point in space. We had some actors come by, and the lead actor from the show was nearly in tears. It's just the emotional response is pretty overwhelming. So it's definitely the most enjoyable. Of 6 months of work, the best 6 hours of it.
It's great, absolutely. And they're good people to be around, those musicians as well. Yeah. Pragmatically, what would you aim for? A master in take 3, 4? What would you? We have in our mind with our budgets and our time scale, the average kind of take number has got to be.
Yeah, I'm more minutes per hour guy.
Okay.
So I know that. In London, you can easily do 6 or 7, 8. Yeah. They can do more, but I'm more concerned about. I don't want to work them so hard that they feel like we're rushing through it and not. Because I feel like they want it to be great. Yeah. They want it to be. They want to create something that makes me happy, makes them happy. So if we just sort of go like this, I find they tune out a little bit. Yeah. Even London, because they're like, obviously it's not that important. We're just taking the first take of everything. Yeah. So I'm aiming for take 2, take 3 on less complicated cues that are either complicated or emotionally very important to me. And we're looking for a performance, or I conduct free. Then we're into take 5, maybe.
Okay.
I mean, beyond that, I've never had to go any further than that with London because we usually nail it.
Yeah, completely. And with this band, did you find yourself having to tacit sections and perform them as overdubs?
Yeah. I mean, they're if air has a fault, if you even use that word, is that the room can get overwhelmed with the big brass, the mighty British brass that we love so much.
It's very close to the walls. That's the issue.
Yeah. So on some cues we would track the brass because it would never mix.
Yeah. So you rehearse them all together.
Yeah. And then do you okay, brass, you sit out, do everybody else, okay, come join us. But a cue like this, we did it all together because it's television. We have to do it with the time we were given, and that is what it is. And near the end of the day, Jeff Foster would be saying, we should really stripe that. I'm going, well, we have 11 minutes left and 2 cues left, so I'm going to make a judgment to say it is what it is, But on a film project, the normal thing would be to go, everybody else but the brass in the morning and the brass on their own in the evening. If you're going to have, 8 trombones and 12 French horns, some sort of massive type of thing.
Yeah.
They'll just kill everybody.
Yeah.
The mighty trombones will eat the strings alive. So,
and talking about zoning out, that whole thing of people sitting around for the blowers to deafen them for a few takes.
Yes, yes. We had to throw pennies at the bassoon player who only played now and then. Wake up. But no, this one we tracked a lot together. And sure, there's some compromises at the mixing stage. You wish you had a bit more control, but I just sort of let go and go, it's a performance and it's beautiful. And I think when you're in the moment of mixing and you're forensically wishing you could bring back something or bring up something, but the emotional response is still pretty great.
Yeah.
So you kind of go with that.
Fantastic. So is there any chance of hearing the final version?
Yes, of course. So all this was made of this, which is the final, turn you off. Here they are. So here's what comes back from my mixing team that goes to the dub, which is a little bit more of a, selected stem format.
Okay.
So in this case, it was, there's a piano part in here you haven't heard yet and some synths and stuff like that. But this is the final, should be the final. Live piano too.